Everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Professional Development Summit hosted by Adoptees. And we're thrilled to see everyone here for our Young Professionals panel, Starting Your Career. This event is part of a series being held throughout February that brings together AAPI adoptee industry experts for career boosting workshops and insightful conversation. And just a reminder, you could win a Burt's Bees gift set. For more information about the rest of the events, please see the chat box. So I'll be your moderator for today. My name is Kara, and if you attended the last session, apologies that you'll have to hear more of my voice. I was adopted from South Korea in 1986, and I'm currently an environmental consultant here in lovely San Francisco, California. And I'll just put in a short plug for another organization that I volunteer with called Adoptee Hub. And we are a nonprofit that serves primarily Korean adoptees. We offer a wide variety of post-adoption services. But I'm here today because I am very passionate about professional development. In fact, I would say mentorship and mentoring and all that kind of networking is kind of almost a hobby of mine. So I'm very excited to be here today. And I'll introduce our panelists. And then we'll get started with some questions. So when I open up questions to the panelists, it'll just be open to whoever wants to, jump in. First, Vanessa, why don't you get us started by telling us about where you're adopted from, where you're currently located, and what your current job is.
Okay, hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm adopted from China. I'm currently living in Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C., and I am a 5th grade gen ed teacher.
Wonderful. How about Aiden?
Hi, I'm Aiden Curran. I am adopted from Busan, South Korea, and I am currently located in Dayton, Ohio, and I am a digital media specialist for the University of Dayton.
Welcome. And I apologize. Is it Caroline or Carolyn? I should have checked. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm adopted from Yangtze, China in 1994, and I'm currently located in Wilmington, Delaware, where I'm a graduate student in art conservation.
Great. So I'm so happy to see a wide variety of careers represented here. So why don't we just dive right in? So whoever wants to go first, can you tell us a little bit about your career path and specifically, what was your first job or your first step after college?
I can go first. So I'm a 5th grade teacher, and I feel like teaching is very much something you go in with the idea of like coming out, like you go and be studying education and you come out as an educator. So the program that I went through in college was very much like directing me toward that path. And the goal was to get hired in the county that I was interning at. And so even before I graduated, I was interning in the county, talking to my principal where I was interning at, talking to my professors, getting kind of ideas of where I wanted to apply. And before I graduated, I had been hired by a local elementary school, and I started working there in the new year in September. So, and I'm still working there now. So it kind of like nicely flowed, which kind of matched up the timeline that the school had kind of set for me in terms of, what I wanted.
Great. Anyone else want to jump in?
I can go. So I had done internships and then also worked part-time my senior year of college for Channel 7, which is a local news station here in Dayton, Ohio. And when I graduated in 2013, I had been working part-time. And so I did that for about a year. And then I had been looking around. And so my first actual full-time job was a job in Philadelphia, which is where I'm originally from. And so it was kind of nice to go back to some family. And I was an associate producer for a branding agency.
And then I'll go. So I started my undergraduate career wanting to do scientific illustration. And while doing that, I found that they really wanted a lot of digital media skills, which I didn't really have and I wasn't that interested in. So I actually found conservation while I was studying abroad in Italy. And while I was there, I found that a lot of the skills that I had learned in scientific illustration transferred over to art conservation, a lot of like color matching, drawing and painting, and things like that. So I decided to return to Italy and study for 1 year, getting a post-baccalaureate certificate in art conservation. And to become an art conservator in the United States, you kind of have to have a master's degree. And so to kind of get into the field, that's where you start, and you have to do a lot of internships beforehand. So I've kind of worked all over the place, but more recently I've worked at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation and the Cincinnati Art Museum, were the two institutions that I worked at most recently. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And also I apologize, I do see in the chat, there's a reminder, and I should have mentioned that if you are an audience member and you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat, or comments, questions are welcome, and we'll leave some time at the end, hopefully, to have the panelists address them. So I'm really interested in this opportunity to talk specifically to adoptees, because like I said, I'm very into professional development, but it's not very often that we get to talk about the intersection of professional development and being an adoptee. So I guess I'll start with a kind of a general question. Do you think that being adopted has shaped your career path or your experience in the workplace?
I would say that yes, because there are two sides to like my career. There's the side where like I interact with adults and parents and my coworkers like everybody else does, and then there's a side where I interact with children. And typically I stick with the 5th grade population because that's my homeroom class, but there's like also a wide range. And I feel like when I think about like one of the things that shocked me as becoming a teacher and they don't talk about is that you have to be very comfortable with your identity, whether that be, your identity as an adoptee, a minority, if you're LGBTQ+, because the kids, we know this, have no filter, right? They will ask questions, they will make comments because it's what they hear, it's what they're surrounded by. And it's not something to blame of the kids because, they're experimenting with language, they're experimenting with the world around them. And I remember going in my very first year feeling like, like I understood myself, but when you're faced with those questions and you're faced with the diversity that your students bring into the classroom and the different viewpoints that other teachers have and how they integrate that into their teaching, and when kids come back to your classroom after being in somebody else's room and they bring back like the ideas of another teacher, like I felt like I had to be like, I was like, whoa, like I need to kind of reflect on who I think I am and what I believe in to kind of be able to not only like in a way protect myself to understand what I believe in, but also to guide the kids the way that I would want them to like leave my classroom and the thoughts that they have. And so I feel like being adopted and being like, I teach in a predominantly Hispanic population. So I often think of what do my kids think of when they see me as a minority, but not a Hispanic minority or a Black minority, because I am the only Asian teacher at the school. And so being that, like, how do I present myself to the kids so they perceive me in a way that I want them to continue to perceive other Asian communities? And then on top of that, I feel like, I don't talk about being adopted with my students because it never comes up. And it's just something that is like, I'm aware of, and like I use it in terms of like understanding kids as a whole. But like that also goes into play, like if it does come up, how do I have that conversation based off of like, my experiences without tainting them? And then, my coworkers do know that I am adopted because we've talked about it and it's part of like our team building, like your history and your background and all those kind of things. And I feel like if anything, it has made them more open to coming and talking to me because they'll have students who are adopted or students who will, have adopted siblings from other families and stuff like that. And so that has been like really nice that the people around me who work with me trust me enough to share that information. and to kind of like interact with me on that level. So that's kind of been an interesting process, because all like when I shared that information, it came out kind of like during the pandemic, and like pandemic on top of everything else makes everything a little bit more fishy and dicey in all the right ways, you know what I mean?
I'll go ahead. Yeah, jumping off what Vanessa said, I feel like on a day-to-day level, I don't think being an adoptee has affected my workplace habits. I feel like when people find out that I am, they treat me the same as if when they didn't know. But I feel like in terms of my own goals, it has shaped my career in that, I'm very interested in studying Chinese and Asian artifacts. And I feel that I'm like very limited by my language abilities and, just not understanding the culture in the same level in ways that someone who grew up in China may understand that. So yeah, I think just in general, there's a lack of diversity in the museum field as well. And so it's kind of a lot of pressure to, kind of represent an area that is kind of underrepresented and just kind of give a voice to that culture that usually isn't talked about.
I actually come from a very unique situation because so my dad worked at University of Dayton, and he got that job when I was 13. And so I attended University of Dayton, and then I now work for University of Dayton. But so people already knew my background quite a bit before, one, I was even a student, and two, before I even worked there. So it'll not to say I'm a celebrity by any means, but like when I would interact with people on campus, sometimes people, oh, I know your dad, how's he doing? And so people already knew that I was adopted. And so there was less of me having to explain. Now, if a coworker asked me about it, I'm very open to talking about it. And it has been a very positive experience for me. But I think it more so shaped when I was in college, just because people didn't know I was related to my dad. So they would ask me questions. And so it's less so now that people know of me, at least. And so for the people who don't, they'll know, they'll ask me where I'm from, and I'll say I'm adopted from South Korea, and then they'll go, oh, like, how's that? And so it's never been like a negative situation.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And just want to touch on, Vanessa, I think you said something about knowing who you are. And so I just want to take a moment to address that, because it can be such a profound question for, adoptees on our, adoptee journey, wherever we are. And I never thought about it in terms of it impacting, our work experience, because knowing who you are and being secure and being confident in your identity, is something that can really, shape your experience as a professional. So I think that was such a, a nice way to put it. So thank you for that. And we're going to shift a little bit more towards kind of more, professional topics. And Caroline, I think you brought up, a lack of diversity in your field, and that's a very important point. So I'm hoping, each of you can talk a little bit more about the demographics and kind of the environment and culture of your workplace. And do you find it diverse? And if so, in what ways?
Yeah, going off of that, so the conservation field used to run on a lot of unpaid internships, which meant that, people who had support and had the funding and, could rely on their families and friends and things like that to support them while they were doing internships like that, are the ones who were able to enter the field earlier. So right now, a lot of the older generation, it's very white. They're trying to change that slowly. Like, they've recognized that there is a problem and there is this lack of diversity. So now within school, I think they're really trying to push for that. But one of the barriers is that even to get into school, they only accept so many people a year. And so you kind of have to really force yourself to do extra and like go that extra mile. And a lot of people aren't able to do that, unfortunately.
I would say in terms of diversity, like when we look at education, there's like many levels of diversity. Like the population I work with, like my coworkers, is predominantly white. Like when I went to undergrad, and like it was a predominantly white cohort, and coming out, like, but teaching wise, I teach a very diverse community, predominantly Hispanic, and then next being African American, and then being mixed race, and then being Asian, and then white. And so we often talk about how the staff members who educate the children don't reflect the children's experiences. So then you can go, oh, like then you can pull in other resources to support what you don't know about students. And so I feel like a lot of the struggle that we have with like curriculum and like people's knowledge of diversity is how do you pull in curriculum that best represents that population. Like if you're pulling stuff about African Americans, you're not only pulling stuff about MLK and like like African Americans in slavery, or Hispanics like doing like labor work. How do you pull in like things that are diverse enough to include everybody and not shine light on like the suffering that they had, but also like the great things they do? And so like I often think about like like as like adoptees and stuff like that, how do I like kind of like encompass all of that and like celebrate things like that, but also like understand that there are like hardships that we all come from as like minorities, and kind of bring that in together.
I would say University of Dayton has a diverse group. It's nice that when I walk on campus, it's nice to see people from different cultures. And I think it's good because, for students who have never been out of the country, it gives them an opportunity to interact with people with a different culture. And we also celebrate the different cultures in the events that we hold. We have an international festival, we have like a food festival. So it's just a good chance for students to come together and celebrate something that's different from what they're used to. And so, and it gives them a chance to like meet other students. And when I was a student, I interact with, many different students from different cultures. And so that's helpful for the students itself. And then even in the workforce, I'm a part of different groups that help with, Asian American population. And I'm an advisor for the Asian American Association. That's a student group, but it also kind of gives me a chance to interact with different cultures. So I think we have a pretty diverse crowd.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And if you were in our previous panel, we talked a lot about, how we as Asian adoptees have to navigate, multiple identities, being adopted, being many of us are transracial and transnational adoptees, while also just navigating being an Asian American, professional, So specifically in the workplace, I want to talk about racial and gender stereotyping. I think that's a topic that resonates with a lot of young professionals. Have any of you experienced racial or gender stereotyping in the workplace? And if so, how did you handle it?
I feel like because my students don't see a lot of Asian people, especially like my first year, and I was, it comes up every so often, like kids will be like, oh my gosh, Miss Shu, kimchi. And I'll be like, okay, what does that mean? And they're like, it means hello in Chinese. Didn't you know? And I go, oh, okay. And like, you can't, like, if they've never had exposure to it, like you can't fault that to a certain extent. But that's when you got to like take a step back and you got to educate. Like, okay, well, like, look, this is kimchi. It's like bright red cabbage. Okay, does this look like an appropriate way to greet somebody? Also, it's from Korea. Like, like having that conversation and knowing that you're in that position to do that. And I feel like as a teacher, like there are very many times, like I've talked to other teachers where the kids have said something, they're like, oh, I can't believe the kids have said that. They just don't know, they're so ignorant. Well, then like teach them, like that's your job. And even like in like amongst my coworkers. And sometimes like it is very exhausting to be like, oh, I have to teach children and I have to teach like adults, but sometimes like it has to be like that, where like people will come up to me and be like, oh, like I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now, but like they'll make a comment. I'll be like, like you really can't say that. Like I'm telling you, like as like a friend, coworker, like please don't ever say that again, because it just isn't gonna go well for you. And I think that I'm always like a component person who believes like, if someone doesn't know, like you can take the like, instead of like shaming them, because you want people to feel courageous enough to experience and explore cultures, right? Like if I told the kids, oh, don't use the word kimchi to say hello to people, that's not right, then they would never like want to be able to explore Asian culture or eat kimchi or like want to know how to say hello in another Asian language. And so I always am a big component of like, if you have the energy and the time, like take that time to educate and to talk about it, to kind of like help expand instead of continuing to close. That makes sense.
Yeah, I have never felt like personally attacked. I have never felt like insulted by like an interaction with anyone. If anything, it's just been that they've assumed something more. I mean, this is more so when I was actually a student, or when I talk to students, they'll just, I've had, when I was a student more so, I had people tell me, I have really great English. And, I'll say like, oh, it's because, I'm adopted, so English is my first language. And so kind of to Vanessa's point, I don't think they meant it as like, you're Asian, blah, blah, blah. It was just more like they just assumed something. So it was never out of like maliciousness, at least I don't think it was. But even in the workplace, if anything, just people would, if they would just say, oh, like, where are you from? But no, I have never had an instance where I like felt personally attacked by any kind of racial issues.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think I've ever had anybody say anything too malicious, but it's kind of like offhand comments sometimes I'll get. So like the conservation field and art in general is kind of becoming more of a pink collar field. So a lot of the comments that I get are, being a woman, and within conservation, I study wooden artifacts and furniture, which is like historically a male dominated field. And so when people find out that, oh, you know how to do woodworking, or, oh, you know how to use a saw, things like that, those are the more of the comments that I get. But yeah, I think people are becoming more accepting as time goes on. People are becoming more educated and just knowing that, women can do the same thing as men as well.
Sure. Thank you so much, for sharing. And, I just want to add that, it doesn't always have to be something malicious, right? Or it doesn't necessarily have to be, a stereotype, but sometimes it's just, you never know when something small might kind of spark a realization in your mind, like in the last panel, I talked about, how, if we grow up in white families and white communities, we're used to navigating white spaces. And then sometimes, I've looked around a room and realized that I'm the only non-white, person, right? Or even things like something that's really impacted, my professional career is that I feel like, especially Asian women are always mistaken for being younger than they are, and that's, I don't know that I would call that, a stereotype, but certainly, when you're trying to establish yourself and being, trying to be seen as professional, it's like sometimes we have to, work a little extra harder, we have to do extra things, be careful about how we dress, for example, to be, taken seriously. So, so thank you so much for sharing. So not necessarily on the issue of, race or gender, but I want to talk a little bit about just kind of boundaries in general. So, we can talk about, our adoptee identities and how I feel like adoption is something that's pretty personal, can be personal and pretty emotional. So have you ever has that ever come up in your professional life where something really kind of sensitive comes up and you have to navigate those boundaries or setting boundaries for yourself?
It's a good question. I will say that to your point earlier, Kara, that yes, we are all adopted, but I think we all have different experiences with our thought process of being adopted. I think that for some people, what may seem very like a small topic might be a very large topic for someone else. So I think that I was thinking about this earlier today, that like my idea of like normal is going to be very different than someone else's idea of normal. And I had a very positive adoption experience. And I know that some others have not had a very positive experience. And so I think that when it comes to boundaries, I think it's just about like kind of what you feel comfortable with and understanding that that's also the case for other people. And so that if you find someone else acting a different way, it should be seen as, okay, they're processing it differently, not wrongly, just in a different way, because it might be different from what you have experienced or are experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like to contrast that, I had a really hard time thinking about this question because I'm still kind of on that journey of like trying to figure out where I fit within my own story and like how I feel about adoption. And so, setting boundaries, I don't think anybody's really dug into the topic when they asked me about it, but I'm also pretty open about it if somebody asks. But they don't really force, which is nice. I guess all I'm saying is I'm still on that journey trying to learn, and I feel like a lot of us we will all continue to do that for the rest of our lives. So
Yeah, I think I can kind of follow on to what Caroline, like you're constantly setting boundaries. And I feel like as you get older and you develop farther into your career, like you will continue to reach different speed bumps, milestones, whatever you want to call them, where you're like, oh, snap, like, and even things that aren't like directly professional, just like interactions with coworkers, right? Like recently, one of my coworkers has just become pregnant, which is like happens to anybody's, people in the workplace, and they're talking about like all the things they need for that first year. Well, like my first year, I didn't have any of this stuff, and to sit there and like listen to people talk about what you need and you don't need is a very different like first year experience than I did. And so then it's like that's like when I'm like, hey, maybe this is where I just like don't engage in the conversation. You know what I mean? And so things like that I feel like have come up, especially like when you work with kids, there's a lot of like early childhood talk and all that kind of stuff. I find is like, oh, that's kind of like where I don't want to engage in the conversation. It's not for me to join in, kind of thing. But like, it's a process, it's a growing thing. Like we're all on it. And in 5 years there'll be something different to think about.
To add on, so I mean, I'm in my 30s, and it really was not until recently where I really started interacting with other adoptees. I think COVID, because everyone was so isolated, I kind of forced myself to find other groups outside of my own personal space. And so I would say within the past year and a half, 2 years, like this is the first time I've ever really interacted with so many adoptees, and it's been very eye-opening. And so I guess it's like, I don't know if I'd call myself a late bloomer or not, but it's really in some ways never too late to connect with others. And so because groups do exist, and so which is why I'm also happy I found Adopteen. But I mean, if you're still in college or your early career and you're trying to connect with other adoptees, go for it, because they're out there, and it's a great way to connect.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you, Aiden, here to join us at Adopteen. And I wouldn't even call it like late blooming. I think that we feel different things at different points in our adoption and our adoption like identity, right? Like, and right now I feel this way and how I want to interact with my coworkers, and that could change very well, like in the next 2 years based off of like the kids I have or based off of like an interaction I had. It's like, it really is like such a fluid journey of like finding yourself as like, honestly, as everything in life is these days. So.
Absolutely. And to echo what everyone said, you know, I think the way that I feel about adoption has changed drastically, you know, throughout my 20s and 30s. And, you know, so has the way that I talk about it, right? So maybe, you know, early in my career, like if it came up, like I would be really eager to, you know, talk about it. And I think, you know, as I've gotten older, I realize it's like, you have to assess the situation. You have to kind of, you know, read the room, so to speak, right? You know, if you get a feeling that maybe someone has a different opinion about it than you do, it's like, it's okay to tread very carefully, or maybe just, you know, not, it doesn't need to come up, you know, in the workplace necessarily. That was just my, you know, my 2 cents. But to start to wrap it up and to bring it back to professional, you know, professional development topics, mentorship is something that has been so important to me, both as a mentor and as a mentee. So can you talk about some practical ways for young professionals to seek out mentorship, you know, even beyond, you know, what's available in their own company maybe, so opportunities for mentorship and networking.
I think that as things have been virtual, I think it's been very good for people to connect with other people because it's easy. And I'm in a group, National Association of Asian American Professionals, which you know, anyone can check out. And it's like, I've only actually met with the board maybe a couple of times in person, a few times, but I've been involved with the organization for a year. And because all of our calls have been virtual. And so I think it's been easier because like sometimes with other chapters, we'll have like a game night, or, you know, they'll have a topic talking about this or that. And I'm literally at my desk in Dayton, Ohio, and I'm talking to people in Baltimore and Chicago. And so with things being virtual, it is not the same as face-to-face, obviously, but I have met so many different people from different states simply by like looking and just going to events. And so if you're still in college, I would just say, you know, get involved. There are organizations that exist that you can get involved with. And if they offer something virtual, I would say go for it. You know, get out of your comfort zone a little bit. And because you never know who you're going to meet. And with the idea of mentor mentee, I co-advise the Asian American Association at University of Dayton, and it's only been for a short amount of time, but through that I have met other adoptees, and I was not expecting that, but it was very cool to hear that this person was adopted. And so and that I've been able to connect this person with other different groups. And so it's like you never know what opportunities will arise when you know, reach out.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Done a lot of like cold calling and cold emailing, and sometimes, you know, it works, but sometimes it doesn't, and you kind of have to accept that not everybody is going to have time. But I found that the one thing that really helped me was to whenever I talk with someone, is to make sure that you thank them for their time, especially because, you know, they're going out of their way to show you that, you know, they're interested in developing a relationship with you. And you can follow it up by just expressing thanks and saying, you know, I'm so glad that you were able to meet with me, even if it's just for a little bit of time. And I think that goes a long way, and people will remember you for doing that too.
Yeah, I agree with both of those things. I remember in college, like they made it like I remember our professors telling us to like make sure you talk to the seniors, like talk to the seniors, because they're going to experience all the things that you are going to experience when you become teachers. And through that, I feel like I developed like a mentor through the senior class, and then they would be like, hey, this is my first year and you're still in college, so keep this resource. And I feel like what's kind of nice about education is that when you enter the field, like literally everybody around you is doing your job, if not something similar to your job, for longer than you have as a first year teacher. So you can be like, eek, how do I do this? And like somebody will do it. But I think that like in terms of like when you start working, like being very open to talking to people, because people have different experiences. Like, you know, education, and I've talked about this with my coworkers, like education is one of those things where like you go to school and you become a teacher and you can get a master's and you can do the same thing for the next 25 years. But then like talking to people around the building, like in your field, outside your grade, you know, doing different things. Hey, you know, like how did you end up at this school? What are your plans next? Like, and then kind of finding somebody who kind of like aligns with your thinking, your values as an educator, or even like just as a person, and then talking to them to just kind of like let out like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, like professionally, what do you think of that? Or like, have you done this in, you know, the past 25 years that you've been teaching? And how do you think like being very like you guys have said, like going out of your comfort zone, like reaching out to people, because like not everybody's going to come knocking on your door like begging to be your mentor. And so showing interest in other people and letting them share their knowledge with you is something that I think is very valuable. And then of course, like thanking them for their time. I think that's so important. And sometimes I often feel like I've developed like mentor relationships where it's like it's very structured, it's very rigid. And sometimes the best thing that comes out of mentor relationships is like a friendship, right? Like where you develop like trust in that person, where you're like, hey, you know, like maybe I really need to, love this professional word, pivot and find something completely different. How can you, like, what can you suggest? How would you do this in your like professional opinion kind of thing? So I don't know, it's just a lot of like reaching out and talking to other people, all that kind of stuff. And joining groups. Oh, there's so many groups out there. They all have Facebook groups too. So just like try your best, check your grammar, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, to add on to what Vanessa said, I would also stress getting to know your colleagues and like people who are also in the same position as you are, because, you know, if you work together, you'll be able to find more people who are interested in what you're doing and like more mentors that way, because they will know other people who you might not know, and you can share that information between you.
Yeah, that's also to say that even if you don't believe it, everybody in your field knows everybody else. Like if you think your field is huge, it's not. Like the amount of times I'm like casually dropping someone's name and somebody's like, oh, I know them because we worked at the same school 5 some years ago. And you're like, oh, keep my mouth shut. I'm just kidding. But like, you know what I mean? Like everybody does know each other in a way. So like be friendly, be open, you know, learn from people, I think is, you know, what to take away from that, I suppose.
Yeah, a lot of my professors and even colleagues now, the opportunities that I got as a college student and even in my professional career, a lot of those opportunities have been through knowing, you know, oh, my colleague knew this, so he's like, oh, you should do this, or you should check this out. And so like people have helped me. And so that which I enjoy. And then I also enjoy helping, you know, other people out. And so because it helps me appreciate it, I appreciate when people, they think of me. And so when I see an opportunity for someone else, like, oh, you know, check this out. And, you know, sometimes things don't always work out, but, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So, you know, as a credit to my, you know, former professors and now colleagues, you know, they helped me quite a bit in my success and, you know, where I am today.
Yeah, these are great tips. And the one thing that I would add is that I feel like social media is such a great tool, and especially because, you know, when we talk about you know, mentorship or networking, that can seem like an intimidating, you know, task. But I think there's so many ways to do it through social media that are very low risk and can be high reward. So like, you know, I think you guys mentioned groups, like LinkedIn groups. Find, you know, join as many as you can, right? And and some of them are very active, and people are posting, job opportunities, all the time. Follow people on Twitter, right? And even, it might feel superficial, but like the smallest, personal connection, you can sometimes kind of be, build a, just message someone, and the worst is that they, you never hear back, right? So anyways, thank you so much for sharing. And I do want to make sure that we have some time for our audience questions. So, so question number one, and again, this is open to all of our panelists. It's a great one. What advice would you give to someone who is still in college to be a good candidate when applying to jobs post-college?
I would say get as much experience as you can. I think that if you can do an internship or work part-time during the summer, I think that's very beneficial. Because I did internships after my sophomore year, I believe it was, but that just carried on to the next opportunity, which carried on to the next opportunity. And so if you're able to get your foot in the door early, that's awesome. Even if you're a graduating senior, just like get involved. You may not be doing exactly what you want to be doing, 20 years down the road, but for me, it's like getting my door into that news station was a big, that was a big step. And, I got to meet a bunch of different people. And so, I would just say, get involved and just seize, if someone presents you with an opportunity, think about it and take it if you want to do it. Even if it seems challenging, take it, because challenges are good because they help you grow. Feeling uncomfortable is good because it helps you grow. And so if someone, presents you with something, take a look at it.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree with that internship advice. Get all the internships. Like I interned with so many grades I knew I didn't want to teach, because that's also important to know, like knowing what you don't want to do. I know I don't want to teach kindergarten. It's not for me. That's important to know as well. I also feel like, especially like in my senior year before I graduated, in the process of applying, like I did a lot of like interviewing prep. Like I would ask like my friends to like ask me the questions, and I would answer them, and we would give each other feedback. Granted, like all my friends in college were also teachers, so we knew exactly what we were looking for, those good old buzzwords, like memorize those and present them at your interviews. Because if you're going to talk about them, likely is that you will integrate those into your work life. But yeah, definitely the internships and giving yourself like experience, just so you know what's out there. Because if you don't know what's out there, you don't know what to apply for, essentially. And like sometimes you feel like you know what you want because you have this like vision of your dream job, but just going out there and exploring widens your options of your dream job, or it gives you a new dream, and that's perfectly fine. I feel like in college we're like, I have this one track mind of like what I want to do, but like you still have the option to explore and to try different things. Like, don't feel like your options are closed off ever, to be honest, ever in your life.
Yeah, to add to that, I feel like, even if you try out something that's not in the field that you necessarily want to be in, you can still find a way to relate whatever experience you gain from that to what you want to do. So my advice would be, to really reflect too on like what you're doing in school and what you're doing in internships, if you have any, or even if you have a part-time job, kind of just like reflect on what you're learning from each of these things, and being really honest with yourself, like what you want to do to get better, like how do you want to proceed forward with what you're learning. And when you write a cover letter for a job and things like that, being honest and like saying that your shortcomings, but also saying like what you want to learn. That's how people will connect with you and want to work with you.
Great, so we have another question. What can someone who is starting a new job do to feel confident during the training period when it feels overwhelming and makes you question your qualifications? That's a great question.
I think when you're starting a new job, anytime, it's normal to be nervous. My first job out of college, I was very nervous. I was moving to I'd already lived in Philadelphia, but I was moving to a city by myself to have a new job, and that's, of course, that's a little nerve-wracking. So I think it's like, when I talk to high school students and they're nervous about going to college, I'm like, that's normal. It's normal to be nervous. When you're graduating senior in college and you're going to the first job that, of your career, you're going to be nervous. Like, that is completely normal. And, in regards to not feeling qualified, like, you got hired. And so, you're there, and, not everyone is perfect. So you're going to make mistakes, and, just learn from your mistakes, and, just listen to what other people say, learn from other people, and take that nervousness and use it to your advantage, because then that will help you be like, okay, this is how I'm feeling. I should talk to this person, or I should talk to these people who are doing this and see what they're doing. And so that when this comes my way, I kind of have an idea of what I want to do.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, it's totally normal to feel nervous about entering a new job. I know that I was. I'll be very honest, like I'm nervous every single time we start a new school year. Um, it's perfectly normal. I think that it's good to like know who to go to ask questions. And I feel like there should never be like any shame around asking questions. If you don't know something, I like, it's best that you ask than to like kind of sit around and be like, oh darn, I just didn't do it right. Like, asking questions is so powerful. Like asking people who are on your same team, asking people who are not on your same team, like, hey, how does this work? Like, how do you do this? Can you help me with this? And then on top of that, like, showing appreciation for the help that they're giving you. Like if you're constantly taking from them and just being like, bye, dude, right? Like that's just not a good attitude to have towards your coworkers. Like I know my first year, I definitely was knocking on my coworker's door being like, math, like, so how does it work today? What are we doing? And she was just like, I got you. And, building that, like with that can come like a mentor mentee kind of relationship just from that. And I often tell, like, I even tell my students this, like, and I think about this often, but like when you get hired for a job, right, you get hired because you have the qualifications, but people don't fire you because you can't do the job, because you can always learn how to do a job, right? Like I can move to another grade and I can learn how to teach third grade, even though I have no experience with that age, right? I can always learn how to do that. But people fire you because they don't like you and you have a bad attitude. So like have the attitude of like wanting to get out there and learn, instead of like, I'm just gonna sit in my office and like be sour all day.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I feel like Aiden and Vanessa both said it very, very elegantly. But I will say, I think being kind to yourself is a big thing. Like this question really resonated with me because I struggled with this a lot. And yeah, just like Aiden said, like recognizing that you're human and that, you're here to learn and you can be taught, I think is a big step.
One thing I'll add is that I love my job. My job also consists of days which I love, and also consists of days which are not, which I felt like, man, like that could have gone better. And that's normal. You're going to have in your job, you're going to have great days, and you're going to have days which you thought could have gone a lot better. And so as long as you can learn from, if you look at, if there was a day that did not go the way you think it should have gone, just look at what happened and then be like, okay, this happened. The next time this happens, this is what we should, look towards to fixing this, or kind of like, how do we, maneuver, or how do we adjust so that we are better prepared for like the next time that this, whatever happens. But it's, it's great to love your job, but there's always going to be good and bad days.
Yeah, that's a good point. It really pays to be reflective. Like if, like Aiden said, you feel like you didn't have a great day at work, like, especially in education, like, oh, I feel like I didn't teach math very well. What am I going to do to like better that? Or, yeah, being reflective really goes a long way, because it'll show you that you're like willing and working hard on growing, and it'll show the people around you that you are also growing. And, you know, if you have someone to reflect with, that's also really nice and really important too, like your mentor.
Yeah, absolutely. Really great insights. And the one thing that I would add is that your company should want you to succeed, right? And it's, sometimes it might not feel that way, and you're going to have to work really hard to think to make sure that you have what you need to succeed. And then sometimes at the end of the day, you might realize if your company doesn't want you to succeed, right, that's not on you, right? That's on them. And it's okay to say, what have I learned? Maybe just for logistical reasons, I need to kind of stick it out and look for the next opportunity. But when you find that workplace where you do feel like, they're invested in you, right? It might, even if it takes you a few jobs, right, to get there, right? When you do find that, right, it's it's great, right? So I think that about wraps it up, unless anyone else has any other closing remarks or final questions. But I just want to thank everyone for this really thought-provoking conversation. I certainly, learned a lot and got some good, takeaways. And thank you to the audience as well. Please join us tomorrow for Professional Development 101, an exciting workshop led by Todd Knowlton, where we'll learn about career mapping and we'll get to practice career planning. So for more information about that and other exciting sessions throughout February, you can visit theparkcenter.org, and the link is in the chat. So thank you so much for coming, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
for having
so
us.
much.